Hello and welcome to the Scott Mansell podcast, where I talk to incredible people from Formula One, motorsport, engineering and business. And on today's podcast, I'm talking to F1 legend David Coulthard. We speak about how he developed his driving style over 15 years in Formula One and through all the different iterations of the regulations. We also speak about what he learned from some of the most influential people in the sport and how he used that to develop his own businesses. Hello, Mr. David Coulthard. Great to see you, and thank you very much for joining me today.
No, it's great to be able to see you virtually.
So I grew up watching you in Formula One and remember your entry to the sport in 1994, followed by your long and illustrious career. And it's been inspirational and fascinating to see how you've chosen to stay involved in Formula One and create business around that. But I'll cover a bit more about that later on. I'd love to start talking about your driving, and in particular how that had to change over the course of your 15 years in Formula One. The cars went from flat floored to stepped, full slicks to grooved and back, and then all the way up to the rocket ships of 2004. Are there any particular changes that stand out to you, and how did you adapt to each kind of generation of F1 car as a driver?
Well, I think I'm lucky in as much that, well, clearly I'm lucky. I was able to become a professional Grand Prix driver, but I think I was lucky in the period of which, when I first drove a Grand Prix car, it was a V12 manual box McLaren Honda. I also, that would have been the V8 Benetton, which was also a manual box. I had a test in one of those prior to becoming a test driver at Williams, which by that point, it was 3-litre semi-automatic boxes. But I'd done the transition from heeling and towing in the lower formulas through to, fully automated upshift, downshift, testing ABS, active, all the bells and whistles that can assist the driver. And the reality is, irrespective of whether it's a kart, whether it's a Formula Ford, whether it's a Grand Prix car, or in your experience in America, a vehicle is a vehicle. It has certain characteristics of which you need to adapt and deal with, and get it around the circuit as quickly as possible. The stopwatch, as we know, doesn't lie. So everything else in between is part of the driver challenge and engineering challenge. So I personally look back on the sort of 95 Williams as a car that I particularly liked driving. Wide track. Slicks, not particularly high revving. I think it was around 16,000 RPM. But we got well over 20,000 by the time I'd finished in Formula One. But it had a reasonable amount of torque, and you had to drive it as such. Get the car straight as early as possible and try and get all that power down. And I particularly enjoyed that style of car. And as we went through grooved and step floors and all the various changes that they did to try and slow the cars down, I think the groove tyres was particularly frustrating, because a great challenge for the tyre manufacturer to be able to maintain the block without ripping the tyre. But the amount of time and money we wasted testing to try and get them to last. And I'm talking to you from Monaco, and to get a qualifying groove tyre, it just wouldn't work particularly well over 20 laps or so of a Grand Prix. But you needed track position, so you sacrificed a good car for the race, knowing that you needed to qualify well, and then you basically hung on for about 20 or 30 laps until the tyres cleaned up. So it was a little bit frustrating. But yeah, I think that to have had such a wide range of experience through to having tested having driven a modern hybrid for television, then it gives me a sort of feeling of how the formulas have adapted.
And just going back to the specifics, you mentioned the 95 was a particularly good car to drive. How was that different to 94? Because the rule change then was from the flat floored of 94 to the plank of 95. Was there a big difference in the overall grip and the kind of the window that the car sat in?
I think that there was such evolution at that time that even though they made changes to try and peg the cars back, the engineers were always finding new ways. If you look at the cars back then, the front wings were pretty much drawn using a ruler, and over the period that followed, they became a lot more sophisticated, and that was able to win back some of the downforce that was lost. I don't recall lap time comparison between 94 and 95. In my mind, we were still going faster in 95. I think that, engine development was such at that time. We were, taking steps of 500 RPM, 1,000 RPM in total revving. So I think that horsepower gains were pretty impressive at that time. But the 94 car, as we know, was a little bit tricky to drive, and seating position-wise in the Williams, the hands were underneath the top of the chassis, so it felt very much like you were sort of driving from your hips. The 95 car, the steering was then exposed, and that gave you a much higher and more comfortable and sort of let's say a nicer position to manhandle the car.
Yeah, fantastic. I've been lucky enough to drive actually a 94 and then a 94 Benetton and then a 95 Tyrrell. And I remember I drove the Tyrrell at Dijon just in some random testing for a private client, and it was a really nice car to drive. It was quite an easy car to drive on the edge. I loved it.
Yeah. Good times.
And then going sorry.
After you.
And then going into the grooved tyres. I've never driven anything like that apart from a race car with road tyres. Is it a similar feeling? Do you have to be quite gentle? Can you feel the rubber moving, the tread block moving? Not
really the tread block moving, because it was, a continuous block of tyre all the way around. But what you did get was, the fingers, if you imagine the sort of width of the actual grooves themselves. I think we started with 3 grooves and then you went to 4 grooves. But what you did was rip the edge of the block, effectively, the continuous block. Yeah. And as that ripped, then you would be rolling over the tyre. So there's a lot of marbles from that type of tyre. And we were at that time allowed to run scrubbed fronts on new rears. So we did that quite often in qualifying, because you just couldn't get the front tyre not to grain on your timed lap. So you'd run a tyre which was worn down, so the block was then smooth. You obviously had less overall potential grip, but you didn't have the graining. And then you put the new tyres on to pick up the traction and the associated rear grip. So it was just, for me, it was a lost era of Formula One, because it was dominated by tyres. The great period, or the great thing about the period, was that we did have a tyre war. So you've got constant development, and going testing, you would test and you would do 15 new sets of tyres a day, which is, as you know, happy days for a race driver. And of course, the downside was you weren't really working with the setup of the car, because you needed a consistent base to then get a feeling for the tyres, and then you had to read into the evolution of the racetrack and try and work out, well, lap time is slower, but the tyre feels better, therefore we'll decide this one's better, but it's slower. It's kind of, it was all a bit confusing, and you had to apply. I remember testing at Paul Ricard, and the tyre that lasted until the horseshoe was the right tyre for qualifying for Monaco. But if you try to use the lap times from Paul Ricard, you'd say it was a second slower than the other tyres, but the other tyres could last a lap of Ricard, but that was too long for a lap of Monaco. So you had to have the confidence to follow your experience and go, no, I want that tyre for the option in Monaco, and that'll be the tyre that's going to give me the grip to stick it on pole. Yeah, the horseshoe is do you mean, is that the long right-hander, about 3/4 of the way around the lap? Okay, yeah, cool. Brilliant. So I'm getting a bit older now, 35, but as a driver, I feel like I'm still developing, I'm still getting better. With your long career, where do you think is the best age for peak performance? I think you're there. I think you're in that window. No. Is it all downhill from that? No, well, different people drop off at different points, but there will be a physical change. I stopped, I think, 37 in Formula One, and probably should have stopped the year before, because your experience is higher, your hopes and desires are the same. But I think that what happens is, it's probably like a footballer. You start to lose a yard in footballing terms. You start to go for gaps that by the time you get there, the gap is closed, just because everything, the processing just slows down. It's aging. You're 35, I'm 50. And I've obviously got more experience. Yeah, thank you. Thanks. And I've got more experience in a lot of things, and with that experience comes, a quiet confidence as to what things you like to do and what things you don't want to do. You're not searching so much as to where life is taking you. But there's no way I've physically got the ability to drive a very fast racing car, and I just don't have the desire. It's gone. It's what was my greatest love for the majority of my life is no longer there, and you just have to accept that it's not because you can't remember how good it feels to drive a car on the limit. It's just that you lose the ability, and then once you lose that ability, you just don't want to be a worse version of yourself. Better to go off and try something else. And so I think that I've always felt that drivers, when they get to sort of late 20s, early 30s, it's not just about the driving experience, but I think it's about life experience. You don't really know in your 20s, even your late 20s, where you kind of fit in or what the life journey is. You know where you want. You want to be a racing driver. You know that you want to win, but I think there's just the life experience is the bit that really gives you that extra confidence. And some people mature at different ages. I look at Max Verstappen. I think he's incredibly mature for 23 years old. Yeah. But he will just be better when he's 30. There's no, he won't be necessarily faster, but he'll just be more rounded. He'll be more worldly. He'll be more experienced, and he'll know which fights to pick and which ones not. And so I think at 35, you're in a prime window, and depending on what type of racing you'd like to pursue in the future will depend on whether you can keep going another 10 years or another 15 years. Mario Andretti and Fangio and various other big names of racing managed to go well into their 40s. In fact, beyond.
To be clear, I'm focused on business now. I'd still race a bit for fun, but I'm my interests have moved elsewhere. Talking about the desire, it just makes me think. It doesn't just stop straight away. There's a kind of period, I suppose, where it begins to fall off. What did that feel like and look like for you? In the beginning of the 2008 season, I was testing the new car in Jerez, and for the first time ever, having done the first run or first couple of runs or the first morning, and looking at the lap times in relative terms and knowing where we were in terms of fuel and what have you, I thought this car isn't going to be a winning car. And for the first time ever, I just didn't have the energy, to imagine that I could, work with the engineers to make it a winning car. Every other year, no matter where your car, you always believe you can develop it. You always believe that the team will move forward, and you just have an energy that is relentless. You don't accept that that's what you have for the rest of the year. You go, right, we can make this better. So I think that's the key thing, not only in sport, but I think in business. People who just don't accept that that's as good as it's going to get are the entrepreneurs, are the elite sports people, are those that lead from the front. And when you get to the point where you go, it's probably as good as it's going to get, then you've already mentally given up. And you can still fulfill a perfectly good role in racing or life, but you're not going to be creative and you're not going to be leading the charge from the front. So that realization was something I didn't expect, but I didn't know. I hadn't lived my life before, so I didn't know what the point is where you go, okay, it's probably time to consider stopping. So I wrapped up at the end of that year, the opportunity to tell family and friends was given to me, and that happened at Silverstone, which was kind of nice, having been a British driver and having won there. And I never regretted the countdown until my last Grand Prix. And even though I got taken out by Nico Rosberg at my last race, I only hold a grudge for a lifetime. He still hasn't apologised. I really wanted, of course, to finish that race, but it didn't happen, and I walked away content that I tried my best. I was given a wonderful opportunity in Formula One with great teams. I tried my best, and I'm comfortable with where I ended up in terms of the driver hierarchy, and I wasn't the best, I wasn't the worst, but I was able to have some success along the way. Yeah, very, very interesting. Thank you. You mentioned the desire there, and I suppose when you're in Formula One, there's, like you say, there's so much energy in development, there's so much energy in travel and being away all the time. But then when I think about my driving now, I just do some fun races with my father, and I just enjoy it. I enjoy the pure driving. I enjoy extracting the speed from whatever car it is. It doesn't really matter, and I enjoy the wheel-to-wheel racing. Do you miss that at all? That kind of pureness of the the reason that we got into this and the sensation of racing?
Yeah, I wish I could tell you yes. Now I feel guilty when I don't, because racing was such a big part of my life from 11 through until I did 3 years in DTM, which I enjoyed the experience. I wasn't particularly successful at it, but by the time that journey, that 3 year, 30 races or 31 races, whatever it was, I was ready to just stand and watch. And I find myself now going to the kart tracks. I have a 12-year-old son, and he's been testing a lot. He's only done 10 races, but we've done a lot of testing. And over the weekend he did 260 laps over 2 days, and he's just putting in the miles. And I'm happy to stand there and watch him. I'm happy to not really coach, because in the end, I don't think it's easy to listen to your dad. The guy that looked after me in karting, Dave Boyce, he also worked with Alan McNish and Dario and Frank Erie and people like that who were all of a similar generation. So Dave Boyce is overseeing Dayton's development, and he looks at the data and gets Dayton looking at the data, and they talk about it. All the things that we never had when I was younger. You just went out and drove round in circles, and if you did it well, someone said well done. If you did it wrong, you got a bollocking. So it's a different time. But I'm happy to be the chauffeur, the sponsor, the lunch buyer, and the helmet cleaner, and I take pleasure from that now, which is interesting. I never imagined that would be the case, and at 35, I never imagined that would be the case. But as I say, I'm more than halfway through my usable life, and I'm content that the journey so far has brought me to this point.
Yeah, exactly. It's you've done so much driving in your career that I only dream of doing that in my whole life, and it must be so. I just had a baby 11 months ago, so
Congratulations.
I'm a little. Thank you very much, David. I'm a little bit away from the karting time, but it must be so great to see your son driving around and see his development there and the challenges that he faces and overcoming those.
Yeah, and the great thing is as well, I can I don't remember very well my sort of whole racing career, but of course I can remember key moments of my life, and in some ways your childhood you remember more clearly in your teenage years than maybe I do in my adult life, because there was so much going on in my adult life that you just get selective as to what the memory holds. But it was a fairly idyllic childhood, growing up in the countryside and going racing on the weekend. So my whole week was devoted to preparing for the weekend, cleaning the car, cleaning the motorhome, cleaning my leathers as it was in those days, cleaning my helmet, packing the motorhome so my parents could take me racing on the weekend. And growing up in the southwest of Scotland, if you're racing at Thruxton Clay Pigeon or Donkeyswell or Summit, that's a long drive. That's a long drive from Scotland, and you'd get there early hours of Saturday morning, and you'd leave Sunday hopefully after the prize giving, and you'd be getting home in the early hours of Monday morning and waking up and going straight to school. So the commitment, and I've always felt that there's been a reasonable level of success from Scottish racers. I'm not being nationalistic here, but I'm just observing that generation, because I think that we had to be prepared and we thought about it all week. Whereas if you lived an hour from 2 or 3 good kart tracks in the UK, you could kind of switch your brain on Saturday morning and go testing or whatever. So the commitment meant that it really mattered when you got there. It was a long drive home if you crashed in the final.
A long, awkward drive home if you didn't have a good weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think that's that, and also the whole journey time there and back was devoted to discussing your hopes and desires, and then discussing the success or failure. So the debriefs were really a big part of the whole weekend and preparation. So I think that, when you mention how many laps I've done in my life, I've driven so many laps in a Formula One car. 3-4 years of Formula One testing back in the days when test drivers did actually test. I remember testing up until the 23rd of December in one particular year, and then starting again on the 2nd of January. that was the sort of way we went testing in those days. There were separate test teams. So I'm incredibly lucky that I've spent so much time behind the wheel. But I do enjoy now standing, watching Dayton go around and his development. And I can remember, he's gone from doing push-ups on his knees, which I remember doing, to now being able to do proper push-ups, which I remember doing. And these are landmark moments for a young boy, coming towards being a young man.
Oh.
And, of course, I want to encourage him to be fit, be healthy, and to try his best.
How you mentioned some things that really, I can feel as well. Like, I remember my, same thing. I would prepare the motorhome, prepare the van, strip the cart down, clean everything, go through all that process. My dad made me do those things, and I think they were extremely valuable, both for my racing, but also now for work and business, just having that dedication and that work ethic. How are you trying to teach those lessons with your son?
Well, he's not doing the same preparation at the moment, and he's aware of that. So when we come back, based in Monaco, you don't have, a garage where you can prepare the cart. So the cart is prepared by. Actually, he's grown up here in France, but he's English. I call Justin Pavelin, who used to race karts back in his teenage years. So he does a very good job on the preparation side. But when we first started with Dayton, before he'd raced, then I bought a little motorhome and put a back box on it, and we would stop on the side of a road somewhere, a quiet road, and we'd get the cart out, clean it, prepare it, take it to the kart track, do the testing, then at the end of the test day, strip it, clean it, put it away in the back of the motorhome. And I loved all that, and we don't have that now because he's going further afield. And quite frankly, I just don't want to be sitting at 100 kilometers an hour in a Heimer motorhome when I can drive there quickly in a car. But
driving to Italy.
Yeah, but we're building a trailer for the UK, which is a 7-meter 3-axle trailer with a slide out with a pod. And what I've just observed from when I karted through to how people kart today hasn't really moved on. The technology has, and people have got big, Formula One style trucks and big awnings, but it's the same. You turn up with a van or a truck, you empty everything out into an awning, you work all weekend, and then usually at the end of a wet weekend in the UK, you then pack everything away, put away a wet awning, and then drive away. So I've decided that we're going to have a trailer with no awning, which when the pod comes out, a ramp folds from the length of the pod, which allows you to access into this space, which has got a kitchen, a debrief area, a toilet, work bench, a debrief area, and you can set it up in 10 minutes, not even. Everything's inside, so you're not lifting anything out. And at the end of the weekend, put the ramp up, slide the pod, electrically moves in, and then you hook it to whatever vehicle, and off you go. So that's going to move karting forward, and everyone's going to be wanting to buy one of these trailers.
I wish I had one of those, David. I remember so many race weekends at PF or Buckmore. We had a market stand awning, the kind of box section that slotted together. Just the numb fingers on the way home. That was one of my biggest memories.
Oh yeah, that's the other thing. I put air conditioning and heating in it as well. So we'll never be too hot or we'll never be too cold. And I just want the whole experience to be, I don't want to sit in the, when we were karting last year in the UK, I was sitting in the car with the heating on trying to get warm because you're standing in an awning. I just don't want to do that anymore. I want it to be comfortable and I want it to be focused. And if Dayton's good enough, then I'll continue to support him. If he's, not hungry and not focused, then of course it doesn't make sense to do it. But we'll see as he develops. But I want to be comfortable while we're doing it.
No, that sounds like the right way to do things, definitely. I was actually talking to Rob Smedley on Saturday or Sunday. So he mentioned that your boys are karting together. Are they about the same age?
I'm not actually sure how old Rob's kids are, but I've seen him at a few kart tracks, Wilton Mill and the likes, and I know he's working on an electric championship as well, which I'm curious to see how that goes. But I actually don't. I had to ask my son the other day, which formula are you in? Because people keep asking me, and I just keep saying Miami Junior because I actually don't really know. There's so many different.
TKN. I can't remember. I don't know the karting categories anymore.
No, when I was younger, it was Junior Britain, Senior Britain,
Yes.
100 National or Supers. It was very straightforward. But now it's of course, it's become big business and it's become quite complicated. And I've discovered that when you're a novice and being based here, but we do some races in the UK, we're in the situation where you need a French license to drive in France, which is logical as a novice.
Yep.
But if you have a French license, you're not allowed a British license. And I've obviously spoken to the licensing, and I've spoken to David Richards. And I'm like, well, how does that make any sense? Because if you don't have the experience to have the international license where you can race anywhere, you can't get it if you're from a family that moves around and travels, and you can't dedicate every weekend in one country.
Yeah.
And also, why would UK and France not both accept to earn money from someone who's prepared to buy a license in both places? So there's a lot of stuff where you realise that grassroots, they just don't take a joined up approach. And I think if you race in France, you're not allowed to race in Italy because of some rule or regulation. It doesn't make any sense to me. So anyway, we've done a few races in France and a few races in the UK, and we'll try and focus in the UK. But the commute is Friday, taking them out of school early, flying in, do the race, and then rushing off to get the last flight back on Sunday so you can be at school on Monday. So not exactly ideal, but there you go. When you have a Scottish father, married to a Belgian, living in Monaco, it's always going to be a wee bit more complicated.
Fantastic. Well, good luck to him. Hope he does well.
Thank you.
So back to Formula One. I've seen that you tested a couple of really interesting cars, or driven a couple of, many really interesting cars. In particular, the McLaren that had 2 brake pedals, and the Williams, I think it was the FW15 that had the CVT gearbox. Can you tell us a little bit more about those cars?
Sure. Well, the CVT, the constantly variable transmission, I think it was a Belgian company that, Belgian or Dutch, that were working on that with Williams. And Patrick Head loved all the sort of potential tech innovations. There was also another gearbox we worked on with an American chap called the Wiseman, which I think it wasn't like the CVT where it's a big steel band that moves between these hydraulic cones and changes the gearing. The Wiseman, I think, had I don't know, 40 gears or something. I don't remember exactly where it just moved up and down the shaft. I remember testing it at Pembrey, and it regularly blew up.
Pembrey?
Yeah, it would regularly blow up, and there would be bits of metal bouncing down the side of the track beside me. But the CVT was, I tested that at Silverstone, and it was a strange one because the RPM, the theory was that it got the engine to the RPM where the torque was at its best, and it would kind of stay there and rise up. So when you came into a corner, instead of the sort of classic, zoom, 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 zoom as the engine comes down the RPM, it would be like, so you'd be braking and slowing down, but yet the RPM would still be like
15,000 RPM.
So it was slightly uncomfortable. And both of the Wiseman box, I think, just never ran reliably, and the CVT got banned by the FIA before it ever was introduced. So a shame, but it was good fun to do that. And then the braking system on the McLaren, it was Steve Nichols, who was a designer there, who came up with the idea. And it was very simple in that the additional pedal would act on the rear caliper depending on a switch, which was a solenoid switch. So if you switched it to the right on the steering wheel, it would activate the right rear brake caliper, and if you switched it to the left, it would activate only the left rear caliper. So what Mika and I had to do was, initially when we tested it, we thought, you just push it and the car would then slow down the inside axle a bit like a tank, and it would rotate the car. But what happened is it would not really lock the inside wheel, but it would certainly under rotate the inside wheel, and you would have an oversteer moment. So what we had to learn to do independently and quite quickly was that you ran the throttle and the brake at the same time. So you would brake, say, for a fifth gear corner a little bit down the gear, and then you would go back on the throttle and on the fiddle brake or the extra brake pedal at the same time, So you would go, you're basically like that. And what it did was it helped accelerate the outer wheel, and the inside wheel was being under rotated, and it would help then reduce understeer and bring the nose in.
Oh, wow, that sounds incredibly difficult.
Yeah, well, but as you know, though, anything that makes you go faster, you learn how to do it pretty quickly. Yeah. So we figured it out, and we raced with that for I think a year and a half, or best part of a year and a bit, and then
did you?
It got it was on the '97 car, and then it was the '98 car. I think Nürburgring, Mika and I were running 1-2. Mika blew up, and then I'm leading, and then like a lap later or 2 laps later, I blew up in front of the start finish, exactly where he'd blown up, and we parked the cars beside each other, and then Peter Fox took a photograph inside the cockpit, and that's where it then was brought to people's attention, and then the FIA deemed it not to be legal. But the '98 car was still so good. We continued to have success with it, and Mika won the championship. So it was a tool to help tune the car, but it wasn't the be all and end all. The be all and end all is always going to be aerodynamics and horsepower. Yeah,
absolutely brilliant. So in terms of the development of the car and moving the car forward each year, how much influence would you say the driver has in terms of the direction of that development, or is it led from the engineers and the aerodynamicists, and then you have to adjust to driving that?
I think that different drivers will be given credit for their technical abilities, and I think that possibly in sort of 70s and 80s, when there was less data logging, the driver was a bigger part of the voice of the car. But today, I think that there's so much data logging that although the driver ultimately, the engineer can say to the driver, well, it looks to me like you've got understeer. But if the driver's saying, well, I hear you, but I'm pretty sure if I'm going to crash with the back first, therefore, stabilize the rear of the car, then, a good engineer will look beyond the data and give the driver what he emotionally needs. So I think a good engineer is not only a qualified engineer, but he's a psychologist as well, because if the driver's eyes are out on stalks and he's saying it's hitting the ground so hard in Eau Rouge, I can't take it flat, and he goes, well, your teammate's got the same ride height and he's getting it flat, that doesn't help the driver. What you need to do is, right, okay, we'll raise the car. The consequence of that will be we will lose some downforce overall. So we'll try and run a bit more wing, or we'll try and whatever. You need to do whatever it is that will give the driver the confidence to get to where he needs to be. And then it may be that once you've got there, you can start dropping the car again because you get comfortable. But there, as you know, there's always going to be a step point where you just need the confidence to keep your foot in. And it's one of the great joys of being a racing driver when an engineer comes with a new aero package and they tell you it's going to give you X amount more downforce, and therefore that corner where you're just lifting should be flat. That's all fine and well, but you're the one that's got to go out and do it. So you really have to trust in your engineers, and you have to trust in the data and trust that the car is showing, when you do the aero runs, is showing more load, and of course ultimately you feel it and then you react to it. But the whole process of engineering, I think, has evolved. But when I was younger, it was very much just saying what the car was doing. And it's important sometimes to say, I don't know, because that you can be misleading. And I've heard stories of drivers coming in and every adjustment they say, oh yeah, I felt this, I felt that. And then you find out that the software wasn't connected, and therefore whatever they were feeling wasn't because of the perceived change. It was just, kind of placebo effect of the car should be better, so therefore they say, oh yeah, it's better. So I think you've got to be honest, and this is something I tell our son, just if you feel it, tell us. If you don't feel it, don't be nervous to say. And you build a relationship from there, and I think it is fascinating. I think it is great to see that relationship. The relationship you have with your engineer and the relationship you have with your teammate over a period of years is, I'm going to say intimate, but obviously not in the way that people could snigger. You're not sharing a bedroom, but it's a very intimate relationship of which you see and feel the emotional roller coaster that's associated with sport. And and hopes and desires, and it's a wonderful thing when it works, and when it doesn't work, like any relationship, you need to move on.
I guess that relationship, when you've had an engineer for quite a long time, like any relationship, you start to be able to predict what they're going to say or what they're going to suggest on both sides of it, from the engineer's perspective as well.
Yeah, absolutely. There's guys that I worked with for several years. I always tended to want to maintain relationships over a period of time, because I felt that the engineer, for me, was not only someone that you trusted to understand the opportunities that were there with the car, what could be adjusted, but they were also your personal data logging memory bank. So it may well be that we had a feeling from the car in winter testing in Jerez, and we adjusted something that made the car better, but I wouldn't recall exactly what we adjusted. So I would say, look, Jerez winter test 2 years ago, what was the thing we did? And they'd go, we did rear geometry. Okay, that's the feeling I have. That's what I want. Yeah. And it really helps you, as the voice of the car, direct them to what it is that might give you the feeling. Because a lot of driving a race car is not physically whether it's generating the load. It's about the perception of the balance and the perception of what the car, as an extension of the human body, is capable of doing. And some drivers are more sensitive to that. I was particularly sensitive to rear stability. If I felt like the rear was not stable, I really struggled to have the same performance as someone like a Mika or a Kimi. But if the rear was stable, it was very difficult for them to beat me in that situation, because I just had such confidence on the brakes, I had such confidence on the entry, which is where I would gain time if I had that feeling.
Right. And did you enjoy that development process and the engineering side of it? And how much of it did you, the details of actually understanding the mechanics and the engineering of the car, how much of that did you get into?
I loved it. I loved that relationship of developing and testing and working with people that really cared, and working with people that, as you all know, mechanics and engineers have got such energy and such belief and such racing desire that it's more than a job. They'll stay up all night rebuilding something or developing something, and have an hour's sleep and be in and hungry and focused. I never recall working with anyone over a long period of time that looked like they didn't care, or rolled their eyes when you said, can you make this adjustment? Because they're the wrong people. Yeah. They're not bad people, those people that do that, but they're just the wrong people for Formula One, where you all have to have hunger. And I always reminded myself, when I was exhausted and tired and lacking patience, I had to take a breath, gather my thoughts, and deliver professional feedback to the engineers. Because if I didn't give a shit because I was tired or whatever, then why should they give a shit? It's just not fair.
Yeah.
You've got, and when I hear Formula One drivers on the radios today acting like spoiled kids, if I was the team boss, I would be like, okay, look, park the car, get out, go somewhere else.
We'll find
someone else who wants to be here. Because if you don't want to be here, and you're just going to dummy in the dust, then all these other people are not earning the money you are, and they're putting in the hours, and they're away from their family longer than you are. So it's the wrong place if you want to act like a child.
Yeah, and I suppose you can see that kind of filter down through the structure of a Formula One team. If the driver's not there, then it's just not very motivating for the rest of the team.
Yeah, 100%.
So I think this is a good point, actually, after talking about the kind of continual development as a driver and engineering, to talk about business a little bit more. You've had a fascinating business career since your time in Formula One. And what were the main lessons that you took from your racing and that drive then into business?
Well, actually, one of the reasons that I wanted to do a book, which came out a couple of years ago, called The Winning Formula, was just because I'm so excited that this journey of life and this journey of being involved in motor racing has given me life lessons and confidence that are not formal, go to university education type learnings, but from people in the industry, whether it's Frank Williams, Jackie Stewart, Ron Dennis, engineers like Patrick Head and Adrian Newey, and all of the many great race engineers and mechanics that I've worked with over the years. Then this being a driver has taken me around the world, and you get the opportunity to meet presidents and politicians. And in the end, what it comes down to is there are good people and bad people. Good people who are motivated tend to do good things, and that's what you need in business. That's what you need in racing. And the fact that Whisper TV is a production business which I'm a partner in with Sunil Patel and Jake Humphrey, who I worked with right at the beginning in BBC. I had the confidence to be an investor there and a partner with them, despite knowing nothing about television, because I actually knew very little about the design and build of a Grand Prix car, and I was 15 years as a driver. So you don't necessarily need to have in-depth knowledge of an industry to be able to play a part in that industry. And the role I've played with Whisper is more on the business development, contacts, opportunities, branded contacts with the corporate partners that I have relationships with. And the upside of having been a Grand Prix driver is it gives you a recognizable calling card. Now, it doesn't mean that because you're a recognizable individual from sport that people are going to say yes. Of course not. You have to have a compelling business reason for people to want to invest in your business or use your business. But what I truly believe is that we operate like a Formula One team. We try and bring the best people together. That doesn't necessarily mean the most highly qualified, because I know some really highly qualified engineers who don't play nice with others. Therefore, they're not team players.
Right.
You need people that are willing to come together and bring their collective energy towards a greater good. And it's the classic thing about small armies can be incredibly effective over large armies if they're focused and structured and have a common desire. So we try and only have people in the team that get the Whisper way and get the need to respond to people timely and to not send something because they go, that's close enough. Send something when you feel you've really achieved the very best you can at that moment in time. And anything, something can always be improved with another day, but making deadlines, how many races would you have done differently if you could race them again? I know I wouldn't have crashed into the pit wall in Adelaide, and I wouldn't have, hit my teammate in Austria. There's a lot of things I wouldn't do if I could do them again, but you've just got to, accept that at any given moment, make a decision and stand by that decision for better or worse, and learn from the good bits and the bad bits. So I've really enjoyed the fact that I can continue to be part of a team, and that's the same with Velocity, which we our first major contract was London Live. Now my partner Guy Horner, who's the brother of Christian, is very experienced in the events field. His business is TBA, and they've been operating across events for many years. But with Velocity and in partnering with Guy, I wanted a partner that understood the industry. But we were going to focus specifically on motorsport and motorsport clients, because that's where my contacts are. That's where my understanding of what can be done. And so I'm really proud of the way that the team have grown there. And a number of our team members are ex-Formula One team personnel who, from marketing and from media, because they get it, they understand, and they know the people in the industry, and they also know what's possible, which I think is important. So I'm enjoying the journey of being involved in these businesses. Maybe not as lucrative as being a driver, and maybe not as lucrative if I discovered a diamond mine somewhere. But good, honest businesses where you're client focused, and I like delivering for people.
It's a really interesting strategy to see you can continue with that as a kind of, I suppose, like a key person or a person of influence, and then partnering with specialists in certain different areas. Is that the view that you take on that strategy? Yeah,
absolutely. Partner with people that have got skills in areas that you don't have. If you only surround yourself with people like yourself, then they're going to make the same mistakes that you make. So, of course, I'm not perfect, far from it, but if we bring together a group of people that have skills in different areas, then we can, I think, with a work ethic and a client-focused honesty, we can deliver. And if people are going to engage in contracts with you and pay your company money, it's because they are expecting a certain level of service. And we don't pretend we can do something we can't. And, one thing that, whether it's in Whisper pitches or Velocity pitches, I'm always fond of saying to the clients, we're not perfect and we might not get everything right, but what we will do is make sure that we're reactive to anything that goes wrong. And my partners are always a little bit nervous about bringing a potential negative into a pitch. But for me, it's about honesty. And I don't personally like someone pitching me as if this is foolproof and it cannot go wrong and guaranteed investment, all that sort of thing, because I just don't believe it.
No.
Life is full of knowns and some unknowns, and reacting to those unknowns as they come along. So I'd rather be honest and frank on that, and I would rather have that pitched to me as well if someone's got something, because if it's so foolproof and it's so guaranteed, why are they there pitching me? Why are they not sitting on king of the castle, having earned all the money from it? So just a bit of honesty, I think, goes a long way.
No, absolutely. We just did a round of pitching actually for one of our businesses, and we had a entire section on actually what could go wrong, and how are we prepared. And of course there's going to be some things that we haven't looked at, but we will do the best given the situation. So of all those high performing personnel that you mentioned before that you'd been around in Formula One, is there one that you can pick out as being the most influential?
Well, I think not to avoid the question, but I think there's everyone that I've had the opportunity, let's say a headline person, whether it's a team principal or whether it's someone like an Adrian or a Patrick, they're so individual in their personalities and so individual in their skill sets. But if I look at Frank, Ron, and Christian, all potentially, let's say, are all facilitating the same role, but they have different personalities in the way they deliver. But they are high achievers, and Frank, I didn't know before his disability, but exceptional what he was able to achieve by the power of his mind and his intellect. Ron was a hands-on individual, very clever, very driven, and in the case of Christian, hunger, desire, that racer's spirit. He raced to a certain level, realized that he probably wasn't going to get a Formula One, but he, in running his Arden team and the way he came in and started with a blank sheet of paper on Red Bull, an energy drinks company, buying Jaguar and learning about how the Formula One team operates. And I love that period working with Christian, not only being a driver but discussing where are some of the potential weaknesses in the team, who can we get to fill that gap. And he used his contacts and I used my contacts, and everything grew from there. So I think that these guys have all been hugely influential. Jackie Stewart before that, when I was 17, racing in Formula Ford, going to Paul Stewart Racing, and these are people that are lifelong relationships that continue today, and they're all personal friends. And of course, we all as friends have our good bits and our bad bits, and we dip into the bits we want and we avoid the bits we don't want. But
that's it,
I love that, and I think that it's all part of the journey, isn't it? That I can look on these individuals, and it was some of the learnings from them that was brought together in the winning formula, because they teach you their way of doing things. Silly little things like Ron would say, sometimes better to keep your mouth shut and let people think you're stupid than open your mouth and confirm that you are. So that's a little nugget of wisdom, because I see some young racers, they're so busy talking, trying to impress you, that they're not learning anything. They're telling you what they know rather than learning something from you. So I know in the context of what we're doing here, I'm doing a lot of talking, but in a lot of meetings and a lot of the journey I've had in my race career, I spent a lot of time sitting, listening, waiting for other people to stop talking. Not only are you then armed with all the information that you're going to have at the point of having to make a decision, some people are uncomfortable with silence and they just talk more and tell you more than they should. But all that is information that you can use. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, from your perspective, being in the position with all the racing history and the businesses and everything now, people, of course, they want to come and they want to show you what they know, and so I guess it's quite difficult from their position. But I mean, it's inspiring to hear how you've been around all of those high performers and being a high performer yourself. It must be a privilege and great to be able to look at all these different people and pull out the bits that you find very valuable and kind of pull them into your own pool of knowledge and use that.
Yeah, it is, of course. And continually tell myself how lucky I've been in this journey. And, I grew up in a village of 350 people. My older brother runs the family transport business and does a fantastic job with that. So I probably saved the business by not ever being part of it. He's passionate about trucks, and that business started in 1916. So one of the generations should have screwed it up by now, but he's taking it to the next level, and he's got two sons and a daughter, and the two boys work in the business now as well. And yeah, exactly. The trailer I was talking about for karting. Actually, I'm going to have it all coloured out, decked out with Hayton Coulthard, the red, the tartan, everything we did when we had our first karting van when I was a kid. And I'm not going to reference the fact it's for karting because I think it just draws too much attention, but it'll just look like a little Hayton Coulthard delivery trailer. And for no other reason than it appeals to my sense of journey, where I've come from. And yeah, we're going karting in the UK. So that's how we used to roll into the racetracks when I was a kid. So we'll roll into the racetracks like that now with our son and see how far he can take the journey.
Absolutely fantastic, David. Well, I think that's a great way to finish things. Thank you so much for talking to me today. Fascinating to speak with you, and yeah, thank you for your time.
No, thank you very much, and all the very best with your pitches in business and your enjoyment of driving race cars. I wish I still had the passion for driving, but I love to see people that have that. So enjoy your driving, and all the very best with your business.